I was adjusting the angle of my new security camera in the living room when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, nestled behind my bookshelf in a spot I'd never checked, was a tiny lens catching the afternoon light. My hands trembled as I reached for it, discovering a sophisticated surveillance device that definitely wasn't part of my home security system. The device was warm to the touch, meaning it had been recently active, and as I examined it closer, I found something that made my stomach drop completely. A small sticker on the back read, "Property of Chen Real Estate, for client security purposes only." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. David Chen, my realtor, had been secretly recording me in my own home. The discovery of that hidden camera shattered the excitement I'd been building for weeks. My name is Emma Martinez, and 3 months ago, I'd made what I thought was the smartest decision of my life. After years of saving every penny from my graphic design freelance work, I'd finally purchased my first home in Riverside Heights, Colorado. The charming craftsman-style house at 1247 Maple Street represented everything I'd dreamed of since leaving Portland behind for a fresh start. Moving to a new city at 28 wasn't easy, but the job opportunity at a prestigious design firm had been too good to pass up. Riverside Heights seemed perfect for someone looking to establish roots. The tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and reasonable housing prices compared to Portland made it feel like I'd found my slice of the American dream. What I hadn't expected was how challenging the house hunting process would be, or how grateful I'd become to David Chen for helping me navigate it. David had been recommended by my new employer's HR department as the go-to realtor for relocated employees. When I first met him at his downtown office, he'd impressed me with his professionalism and knowledge of the local market. He was impeccably dressed, spoke with the confidence of someone who'd closed hundreds of deals, and seemed genuinely interested in finding me the perfect home. His office walls were covered with awards and testimonials from satisfied clients, and his assistant, Jennifer Kim, had assured me that David would take excellent care of me. The house hunting process had been more intense than I'd anticipated. Riverside Heights was experiencing a competitive market, with multiple offers on every decent property. David guided me through the process with what seemed like genuine concern for my best interests. He'd call me at all hours with new listings, rush me to showings, and provide detailed market analyses that helped me understand why certain properties were priced the way they were. When I found 1247 Maple Street, David had been the one to encourage me to offer above asking price to secure it. The 3-bedroom craftsman had stolen my heart the moment I walked through the front door. The original hardwood floors gleamed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through large windows, and the updated kitchen featured granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that would be perfect for entertaining. The master bedroom had a walk-in closet that could double as a home office, and the basement offered plenty of storage space. The backyard was private and spacious, with mature trees providing natural privacy screens from the neighbors. David had been particularly enthusiastic about the home's security features. The previous owners had installed a comprehensive system with cameras covering the exterior, motion sensors on all windows and doors, and a smart home integration that allowed everything to be controlled from a mobile app. He'd spent considerable time explaining how the system worked, even helping me set up the initial configurations after I moved in. His attention to detail had seemed like excellent customer service at the time. The buying process had been surprisingly smooth once my offer was accepted. David handled all the paperwork, coordinated with the mortgage company, and even recommended a home inspector who gave the property a clean bill of health. He'd been present for every walkthrough, pointing out features I might have missed, and ensuring I understood exactly what I was purchasing. On closing day, he'd presented me with a beautiful housewarming gift, a set of smart home devices that would integrate perfectly with the existing security system. Moving day had been chaotic but exciting. My boyfriend Jake Thompson had driven down from Denver to help coordinate the movers and get me settled. Jake worked in IT security for a major corporation, and he'd been impressed by the home's technology integration. He'd spent hours helping me optimize the security system, install additional smart devices, and ensure everything was properly networked. His technical expertise had been invaluable in making the house feel like home. The first month in the new house had been blissful. I'd thrown myself into decorating, creating a space that reflected my personality while maintaining the home's original character. My design background proved useful in selecting furniture and artwork that complemented the craftsman architecture. The neighbors had been welcoming, particularly Lisa Rodriguez, who lived next door at 1245 Maple Street. Lisa was a detective with the Riverside Heights Police Department, and her presence had been reassuring as I adjusted to living alone in a new city. I'd started planning a housewarming party for the following weekend, inviting my new coworkers, neighbors, and a few friends from Portland who'd promised to visit. The party was meant to be a celebration of my new beginning, a way to show off the beautiful home I'd worked so hard to afford. I'd spent days planning the menu, selecting decorations, and preparing the house to showcase its best features. The event felt like an important milestone in establishing my new life in Riverside Heights. David had stayed in touch after the closing, which I'd initially appreciated as good customer service. He'd call occasionally to check how I was settling in, ask if I needed any recommendations for local services, and ensure I was happy with the purchase. His continued involvement had seemed thoughtful rather than intrusive. He'd even offered to help with the housewarming party, suggesting caterers and offering to provide a reference for any home improvements I might want to make. The day I discovered the hidden camera started like any other. I'd been working from home, preparing graphics for a client presentation, when I decided to adjust the positioning of my legitimate security cameras. The system had been alerting me to motion in the living room even when I was sitting perfectly still, and I wanted to fine-tune the sensitivity settings. Jake had taught me to regularly check all the cameras to ensure they were functioning properly and hadn't been tampered with. As I moved the bookshelf to get a better angle on the camera mounted in the corner, something caught my eye. A small reflection, almost like a lens flare, appeared to be coming from behind the shelf. My first thought was that it might be a damaged picture frame or a piece of decorative glass catching the light. But as I investigated further, my heart began to race. The reflection was coming from a sophisticated piece of surveillance equipment that had been carefully concealed behind my books. The device was small but clearly professional grade. It had a wide-angle lens, appeared to be wireless, and had a small LED indicator that suggested it was actively recording. The positioning was perfect for capturing the entire living room, including the seating area where I spent most of my time when entertaining guests. The camera had been placed with obvious expertise, hidden in a location that would be nearly impossible to spot during normal daily activities. My hands shook as I carefully removed the device, being careful not to damage it in case it contained evidence. The weight and build quality, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Suggested this wasn't some cheap spy gadget ordered online. This was professional surveillance equipment, the kind used by security firms or private investigators. The realization that someone had been watching me in my own home for weeks or possibly months made me feel violated in a way I'd never experienced before. But it was the small sticker on the back that transformed my shock into something much more focused and dangerous. Property of Chen Real Estate for client security purposes only. The implications hit me like a physical blow. David Chen, the realtor I'd trusted with the biggest purchase of my life, had been secretly recording me in my own home. The man who'd helped me find my dream house had turned it into his personal surveillance operation. I sat down heavily on my couch, staring at the camera in my palm while my mind raced through the possibilities. How long had it been there? What had it recorded? Were there others? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, each one more disturbing than the last. The violation felt complete and overwhelming, but beneath the shock, something else was beginning to build. A cold, calculating anger that would prove far more dangerous to David Chen than any emotional outburst. The timing couldn't have been worse. My housewarming party was scheduled for Saturday, just 5 days away. 30 people had already confirmed their attendance, including my parents who were flying in from Portland specifically for the event. The party was supposed to be my official introduction to Riverside Heights society, a chance to show off my beautiful new home and establish myself as a valued member of the community. Now, the thought of hosting guests in a space where I'd been secretly monitored felt impossible. I forced myself to think rationally despite the emotional turmoil. If David had placed one camera, there were likely others. The systematic nature of the surveillance suggested this wasn't a spontaneous decision, but rather a calculated invasion of my privacy. The professional quality of the equipment indicated significant financial investment, which meant this was probably not an isolated incident. David Chen was likely conducting surveillance on other clients as well. The betrayal cut particularly deep because of how much I'd trusted him throughout the buying process. I'd shared personal financial information, discussed my living situation, and even mentioned my work schedule and travel plans. David had encouraged me to think of him as more than just a realtor, positioning himself as a local resource and friend. The revelation that he'd been using this trust to justify secret surveillance felt like a violation of everything I'd believed about my new life in Riverside Heights. Jake was in meetings all afternoon, so I couldn't immediately call him for support. But I knew his technical expertise would be crucial in understanding the full scope of what had been done to me. His background in IT security would help me determine what information might have been compromised and how to protect myself going forward. More importantly, his calm, analytical approach would help me think through the situation strategically rather than emotionally. Lisa Rodriguez next door was another resource I could potentially leverage. As a police detective, she'd understand the legal implications of what David had done. Her professional network might also provide access to resources I'd need to build a case against him. The fact that she lived right next door and had probably observed David's visits to my house could make her a valuable witness as well. I spent the rest of the afternoon conducting a methodical search of my entire house, looking for additional surveillance devices. The process was tedious and invasive, requiring me to examine every room from angles I'd never considered before. I found 2 more cameras. One in the kitchen, positioned to capture the breakfast bar where I often worked on my laptop, and another in the master bedroom that made me physically sick to discover. The bedroom camera was hidden inside what appeared to be a smoke, complete and detector, positioned to record the entire sleeping area. Each discovery made the violation feel more deliberate. This wasn't casual surveillance or some misguided security measure. David had systematically compromised my privacy in the most intimate spaces of my home. The bedroom camera in particular crossed a line that transformed this from an invasion of privacy into something that felt criminal. The thought of this man watching me sleep, change clothes, or share intimate moments with Jake filled me with a rage I'd never experienced before. By the time Jake arrived that evening, I had documented all 3 cameras with photographs and had begun researching Colorado's surveillance laws. The legal landscape was complex, but it was clear that David had violated multiple statutes regarding consent and privacy expectations. The fact that he was a licensed professional made the violations even more serious, as he was subject to additional regulatory oversight through the State Real Estate Commission. Jake's reaction was immediate and intense. His technical background meant he understood the implications even faster than I had. He insisted on conducting his own sweep of the house, using specialized equipment he kept in his car for work purposes. His detection devices revealed one additional camera I'd missed, hidden in the home office area where I kept my computer and important documents. The systematic placement of the surveillance equipment suggested someone with detailed knowledge of the house layout and my daily routines. The conversation that followed was difficult, but necessary. Jake helped me understand the technical capabilities of the devices, including their wireless transmission capabilities and data storage methods. The cameras were sophisticated enough to stream live footage to remote locations and store recorded material for extended periods. The realization that David might have been watching me in real time from his office or home added another layer of violation to an already traumatic discovery. We spent hours discussing our options. Jake's instinct was to immediately contact the police and have David arrested, but I was beginning to think more strategically. A direct confrontation would certainly bring immediate justice, but it might not address the broader issues or ensure that David faced consequences proportional to his actions. The real estate industry was relationship-based, and David's reputation and livelihood were more valuable to him than any fine or brief legal inconvenience. I found myself thinking about the housewarming party and how it could be transformed from a celebration into something more purposeful. The guest list included several influential people in the Riverside Heights community, including other real estate professionals, potential clients of David's, and civic leaders who would be interested in knowing about his illegal activities. The party could become a platform for exposing David's behavior to the people who mattered most to his business and reputation. The idea of canceling the party entirely felt like letting David win. He'd already stolen my sense of security and privacy in my own home. I wasn't going to let him take away my celebration and my introduction to the community as well. Instead, I was beginning to formulate a plan that would transform the party into something David would remember for the rest of his career. That night, I barely slept. Every shadow in the bedroom seemed threatening. Every sound from the house settling felt ominous. The cameras were gone, but the violation remained. I kept thinking about all the private moments David had witnessed, all the personal conversations he'd overheard, all the intimate aspects of my life he'd stolen without permission. The anger was building into something more focused and determined. By morning, I had made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be David Chen's victim. I was going to become his worst nightmare. The housewarming party would proceed as planned, but it would serve a very different purpose than originally intended. Instead of introducing myself to the community as Emma Martinez, the new graphic designer, I would introduce myself as the woman who exposed David Chen's illegal surveillance operation. The transformation from victim to strategic opponent felt natural and empowering. My design background had taught me to think systematically about complex problems, to consider multiple perspectives, and to create solutions that achieved specific objectives. My freelance experience had shown me how to build networks, leverage relationships, and manage projects with multiple stakeholders. These skills would prove invaluable in the campaign I was about to launch against David Chen. The first step was gathering information and building alliances. I needed to understand David's business operations, his professional relationships, and his vulnerabilities. I also needed to identify people who could help me achieve my objectives, whether through official channels or informal networks. The next few days would be crucial in establishing the foundation for what I was already thinking of as Operation Surveillance Reversal. I called in sick to work, claiming a family emergency that required my immediate attention. This wasn't entirely false, as dealing with the surveillance situation had become my top priority. I spent the morning researching David's business, his professional associations, and his standing in the local real estate community. The internet provided a wealth of information about his transactions, his marketing strategies, and his client testimonials that would prove useful in understanding his professional image. Chen Real Estate appeared to be a successful mid-sized firm with about a dozen agents and support staff. David was the owner and primary broker, with Jennifer Kim serving as his business partner and operations manager. The firm specialized in residential sales and had developed a reputation for helping relocated professionals find homes in Riverside Heights. Their marketing emphasized personalized service, local expertise, and comprehensive support throughout the buying process. The irony wasn't lost on me that David's business model was built on trust and personal relationships, exactly the things he'd violated in my case. His website featured testimonials from satisfied clients praising his integrity, professionalism, and dedication to their needs. The disconnect between his public image and his private actions was stark and would become a key element in my strategy. I also researched the legal and regulatory framework surrounding real estate professionals in Colorado. Licensed realtors were subject to strict ethical guidelines and professional standards enforced by the State Real Estate Commission. Violations could result in license suspension, financial penalties, and permanent damage to professional reputation. The surveillance activities David had conducted would likely violate multiple provisions of the Professional Code of Conduct. By noon, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on David Chen's business operations, professional relationships, and potential vulnerabilities. The information would be crucial in developing a strategic response that maximized the impact of my revelations. I was no longer thinking about this as a personal dispute, but as a professional campaign with specific objectives and measurable outcomes. The phone rang, interrupting my research. The caller ID showed David Chen's number, and I felt my pulse quicken. This was the first contact from him since I'd discovered the cameras, and I suspected he might be checking to see if I'd found his surveillance equipment. I let the call go to voicemail, needing time to prepare for what would inevitably be a crucial conversation. His message was brief and seemingly innocent. "Hi Emma, just checking in to see how you're settling in. I heard you're planning a housewarming party this weekend and wanted to see if you needed any recommendations for local services. Give me a call when you get a chance." The casual tone was infuriating given what I now knew about his activities. The mention of the housewarming party was particularly galling, as it suggested he'd been monitoring my preparations through his surveillance system. The call confirmed that David had no idea I'd discovered his cameras, which gave me a significant tactical advantage in planning my response. I decided not to return his call immediately, instead using the time to continue building my case and developing my strategy. The element of surprise would be crucial in ensuring that David couldn't take defensive measures or attempt to cover up his activities. I wanted him to remain confident and unsuspecting until the moment of revelation at the housewarming party. The afternoon brought an unexpected opportunity when Lisa Rodriguez knocked on my door. She was returning from her shift at the police department and had noticed I'd been home all day, which was unusual for my normal work schedule. Her concern was genuine, and I made a split-second decision to trust her with what I'd discovered. Lisa's reaction was immediate and professional. As a detective, she understood the legal implications of David's actions and the evidence I'd gathered. She examined the cameras with the expertise of someone who'd dealt with similar cases before, and her assessment confirmed my suspicions about the sophistication and cost of the surveillance equipment. More importantly, Lisa provided insights into the broader implications of David's activities. She explained that real estate professionals had unique access to homes during the buying process, including opportunities to install surveillance equipment during inspections, walkthroughs, and closing procedures. If David was conducting surveillance on one client, he was likely doing it to others as well. The conversation with Lisa transformed my understanding of the situation, from a personal violation to a potential criminal enterprise. David wasn't just invading my privacy. He was potentially conducting systematic surveillance on multiple clients for unknown purposes. The implications were staggering and provided additional motivation for pursuing a comprehensive response. Lisa offered to help me navigate the legal aspects of the situation, but she also understood why I wanted to handle it strategically rather than simply filing a police report. Her experience with similar cases had shown her that the most effective outcomes often came from coordinated responses that addressed both legal and professional consequences simultaneously. As evening approached, I finalized my plans for the housewarming party. The event would proceed as scheduled, but it would serve a very different purpose than originally intended. Instead of a celebration, it would become a revelation. Instead of introducing myself as a new community member, I would introduce myself as someone who wouldn't tolerate being victimized. The transformation of my housewarming party from celebration to confrontation felt like reclaiming control over my own narrative. David Chen had violated my privacy and my trust, but he'd also underestimated my capacity for strategic response. The party would demonstrate to him and to everyone else in attendance that Emma Martinez was not someone to be trifled with. I spent the evening preparing for what would be the most important party of my life, though not for the reasons I'd originally planned. The decorations would remain the same, the food would be as carefully planned as before, but the purpose would be entirely different. By the time the weekend arrived, everyone in Riverside Heights would know exactly what kind of man David Chen really was. The violation was complete, but so was my determination to ensure that David faced consequences proportional to his actions. The housewarming party would be just the beginning of what I was already thinking of as a comprehensive campaign for justice. David Chen was about to learn that some people fight back when pushed too far, and that underestimating Emma Martinez was the biggest mistake of his professional career. The morning after my conversation with Lisa, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since discovering the cameras. My anger had crystallized into something far more useful. A methodical plan for gathering intelligence and building the network I'd need to expose David Chen properly. I made coffee and opened my laptop, ready to begin what I was mentally calling my reconnaissance phase. My first priority was understanding exactly how David had gained access to install his surveillance equipment. The cameras hadn't been there during my initial walkthroughs, which meant they'd been placed after I'd made my offer but before I'd moved in. David had been present for the home inspection, the final walkthrough, and had even insisted on being there when I'd changed the locks for security reasons. Any of these occasions could have provided the opportunity he'd needed. I pulled out all the paperwork from my home purchase, spreading it across my dining table like pieces of a puzzle. The timeline was revealing when examined through the lens of surveillance installation. David had been unusually insistent about accompanying me to every appointment, claiming it was part of his comprehensive service model. He'd also recommended the home inspector, the locksmith, and the security system technician who'd helped me set up the existing cameras. The pattern suggested a level of coordination that made me wonder how many people were involved in his operation. The home inspection report caught my attention as I reviewed it more carefully. The inspector, Mike Stevens, had noted several areas requiring attention, including smoke detectors that needed battery replacement. This was particularly significant because one of David's cameras had been hidden inside a fake smoke detector in my bedroom. The inspector had specifically mentioned accessing that area, providing David with detailed knowledge of where surveillance equipment could be concealed. I called Mike Stevens directly, introducing myself as the homeowner and asking some follow-up questions about his inspection process. His responses were illuminating. He confirmed that David had been unusually involved during the inspection, asking detailed questions about electrical systems, network wiring, and security device placement. Mike also mentioned that David had requested copies of all his photos and notes, claiming he wanted to help me prioritize repairs and improvements. The conversation with Mike revealed another troubling detail. David had specifically asked about the home's Wi-Fi network infrastructure and had taken photos of the router and network equipment locations. This information would have been crucial for setting up wireless surveillance cameras that could transmit data remotely. The technical sophistication of David's operation was becoming clearer, and it suggested he'd been planning this surveillance for weeks before I'd even moved in. Next, I contacted the locksmith, who'd changed my locks. Frank Morrison had been recommended by David and had seemed professional during our appointment. When I called Frank with questions about my security setup, he was surprisingly forthcoming about his interaction with David. Apparently, David had asked detailed questions about my daily schedule, when I'd be home, and whether I lived alone. Frank had thought it was unusual for a realtor to be so interested in a client's personal routine, but he'd assumed it was part of David's customer service approach. Frank also revealed that David had specifically requested to be present when the locks were changed, claiming he wanted to ensure everything was done properly. During that visit, David had spent considerable time examining the house's interior, supposedly checking for any damage or issues he might have missed. Frank remembered that David had been particularly interested in the basement, the attic access, and the locations of electrical outlets throughout the house. The picture emerging from these conversations was of a man who'd systematically gathered intelligence about my home and my routines to facilitate his surveillance operation. David hadn't simply decided to spy on me impulsively. He'd planned it carefully, from the beginning of our professional relationship. This premeditation made his actions even more disturbing and would strengthen any legal case I might eventually pursue. I spent the afternoon researching David's other recent transactions, using public records and online databases to identify other clients he'd represented in the past year. The information was sobering. David had helped at least 15 people purchase homes in Riverside Heights over the past 12 months, most of them single professional women or couples, where one partner traveled frequently for work. The pattern suggested he was targeting clients who might be particularly vulnerable to surveillance, or who might have information valuable to him. Armed with this information, I decided to reach out to some of David's recent clients directly. I crafted a careful script that presented me as a current client seeking references for additional services David had recommended. The conversations that followed were eye-opening and increasingly disturbing. Sarah Mitchell had purchased a home through David 6 months earlier and had experienced several concerning incidents. She'd noticed items moved in her house, changes to her computer settings, and the strange feeling that someone had been in her home while she was at work. When she'd mentioned these concerns to David, he'd suggested she was probably imagining things due to the stress of moving. He'd also recommended a security system upgrade and had insisted on being present during the installation. Jennifer Walsh had a similar story. She'd worked with David 8 months ago and had experienced unexplained problems with her home network, mysterious changes to her social media settings, and the unsettling sensation that her privacy had been compromised. David had been sympathetic and helpful, suggesting various solutions and offering to coordinate repairs. He'd also maintained contact with her long after the sale, checking in regularly and asking about her adjustment to the new home. The most disturbing conversation was with Amanda Foster, who'd purchased her home through David just 2 months before me. Amanda had discovered unauthorized charges on her credit cards, suspicious activity on her bank accounts, and evidence that someone had accessed her personal email. She'd assumed these were random cybercrimes until she'd found a small electronic device hidden in her bedroom that she couldn't identify. When she'd confronted David about his continued access to her home, he'd become defensive and had accused her of being paranoid. Each conversation revealed a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond simple surveillance. David appeared to be using his access to clients' homes to gather personal information, monitor their activities, and potentially engage in identity theft or financial fraud. The scope of his criminal enterprise was much larger than I'd initially imagined, and it affected multiple victims who hadn't yet realized what had happened to them. I documented every conversation carefully, creating a detailed timeline of David's activities and a comprehensive list of potential victims. The evidence was compelling and would be crucial in building a case against him. More importantly, these other victims represented potential allies who might be willing to help expose David's activities if approached properly. My next step was researching David's professional relationships and business partnerships. Chen Real Estate was a member of the local real estate board, the Chamber of Commerce, and several professional associations. David served on the board of directors for the Riverside Heights Business Association and was a frequent speaker at real estate conferences. His public image was that of a successful, ethical professional who was deeply committed to his community and his clients. This public persona would make the revelation of his surveillance activities even more damaging. David had built his reputation on trust and integrity, and the exposure of his illegal activities would destroy the foundation of his business. The contrast between his public image and his private actions would make the story particularly compelling to local media and professional organizations. I also researched Jennifer Kim, David's business partner and operations manager. Jennifer had been present during some of my interactions with David and had seemed genuinely professional and ethical. Her involvement in the business made her either a potential accomplice or another victim of David's deception. I needed to understand her role before deciding how to approach her. The research revealed that Jennifer had a strong reputation in the real estate community and had been recognized for her ethical business practices. She'd been David's partner for 3 years and had helped build Chen Real Estate into one of the more respected firms in Riverside Heights. Her professional standing suggested she probably wasn't aware of David's surveillance activities, which made her a potential ally if approached correctly. I decided to test Jennifer's knowledge by scheduling a meeting under the pretense of discussing additional services. I called Chen Real Estate and asked to speak with Jennifer about some concerns I had with my home purchase. Her response was immediate and professional, offering to meet with me that afternoon to address any issues I might have. The meeting with Jennifer took place at a coffee shop downtown, away from the real estate office where David might overhear our conversation. Jennifer arrived punctually, dressed professionally, and seemed genuinely concerned about my satisfaction with the home purchase. Her demeanor suggested she was unaware of David's surveillance activities and was approaching our meeting as a standard customer service interaction. I began carefully, expressing general concerns about my home security and asking about David's recommendations for various service providers. Jennifer's responses were helpful and seemed genuine, but I noticed she mentioned that David had been particularly interested in security systems lately. He'd apparently been researching new technologies and had attended several training seminars on home security integration. When I mentioned that I'd found some electronic devices in my home that I couldn't identify, Jennifer's expression changed subtly. She asked specific questions about the devices, where I'd found them, and whether I'd discussed them with David. Her questions suggested she might have suspected something was wrong, even if she didn't know the full scope of David's activities. I decided to take a calculated risk and showed Jennifer one of the cameras I'd discovered. Her reaction was immediate and genuine shock. She examined the device carefully, noting the professional quality and the Chen Real Estate sticker on the back. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the camera, and I could see her mind racing through the implications. Jennifer's first question was whether I'd confronted David about the cameras. When I explained that I hadn't, she seemed relieved but also deeply troubled. She confirmed that the devices were not part of any legitimate business practice and that she'd had no knowledge of David's surveillance activities. Her reaction convinced me that she was another victim of his deception rather than an accomplice. The conversation that followed was intense and revealing. Jennifer had noticed changes in David's behavior over the past year, including increased secrecy about his client interactions, unusual requests for technical equipment, and a strange obsession with home security systems. She'd also observed that he'd been maintaining unusually close contact with female clients, claiming it was part of his premium service model. More significantly, Jennifer revealed that David had access to all client files, including financial information, personal details, and home security codes. He'd insisted on maintaining this access even for clients she was primarily responsible for, claiming it was necessary for quality control. The scope of personal information David had access to was staggering, and explained how he'd been able to conduct such sophisticated surveillance operations. Jennifer also confirmed my suspicions about the service providers David had recommended. Mike Stevens, Frank Morrison, and several other contractors were regular referral partners who gave David detailed information about their work in clients' homes. While Jennifer didn't believe these contractors were deliberately participating in surveillance, their reports to David provided him with the technical knowledge he needed to install his equipment effectively. The most disturbing revelation was that David had been collecting and storing detailed files on all his clients, including photographs of their homes, copies of their financial documents, and notes about their personal routines. Jennifer had assumed these files were for customer service purposes, but she now realized they could have been used for much more sinister activities. By the end of our conversation, Jennifer had committed to helping me expose David's activities. She agreed to provide access to client files, document David's unusual behavior, and help me contact other potential victims. Her cooperation would be crucial in building a comprehensive case against David and ensuring that all his victims receive justice. Jennifer also provided valuable insights into David's vulnerabilities and the best ways to approach exposing his activities. She explained that David was particularly concerned about his reputation in the real estate community and his standing with professional organizations. A public scandal would destroy his business and his ability to work in the industry, which made reputation damage a powerful weapon against him. We agreed to meet again the following day to plan our strategy more thoroughly. Jennifer would spend the evening reviewing client files and documenting any suspicious patterns she could identify. She also promised to research David's financial records and business expenses to see if she could find evidence of his surveillance equipment purchases. As I drove home from the coffee shop, I felt a sense of momentum building. The intelligence gathering phase was yielding better results than I'd hoped, and I was building a network of allies who could help me expose David's activities effectively. Jennifer's cooperation was particularly valuable because she had access to information and resources that would be crucial in building a comprehensive case. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Williams, a private investigator who'd been recommended by Lisa Rodriguez. Marcus had extensive experience with surveillance cases and had offered to help me understand the technical aspects of David's operation. His expertise would be valuable in documenting the evidence and ensuring that my case against David was legally sound. Marcus arrived at my house an hour later, carrying a case of sophisticated detection equipment. His examination of my home was thorough and professional, confirming that I'd found all the surveillance devices David had installed. He also provided technical analysis of the cameras, including their capabilities, data transmission methods, and estimated costs. The cameras were indeed professional grade, with capabilities that included night vision, motion detection, and remote access through secure networks. Marcus estimated that David had spent several $1,000s on the surveillance equipment in my home alone, suggesting that his operation was well-funded and systematic. The technical sophistication also indicated that David had received training or assistance in setting up the surveillance network. Marcus's most significant contribution was his analysis of the data transmission patterns. The cameras had been configured to send footage to a central server, which meant David had been storing and potentially analyzing recorded material from multiple locations. This centralized approach suggested that surveillance was a core component of his business model, not just a casual violation of individual clients' privacy. The investigation also revealed that David had been accessing the surveillance feeds remotely, meaning he could watch his victims in real time from his office or home. The psychological impact of this revelation was significant, as it meant David had been an invisible presence in my home for months. The violation felt even more complete and personal, knowing that he'd been watching me live my daily life. Marcus provided me with a comprehensive report documenting his findings, including technical specifications of the surveillance equipment, analysis of the data transmission patterns, and recommendations for legal action. The report would be crucial evidence in any criminal or civil proceedings against David, and would help establish the scope and sophistication of his surveillance operation. More importantly, Marcus offered to help me gather evidence against David by conducting surveillance of his own activities. He could monitor David's movements, document his interactions with other clients, and potentially gather evidence of additional criminal activities. This counter-surveillance would provide valuable intelligence for planning my confrontation with David. The next morning brought another breakthrough when Jennifer called with significant news. Her review of client files had revealed a pattern of suspicious activity that extended far beyond simple surveillance. David had been systematically gathering personal information about his clients, including their work schedules, travel plans, financial information, and personal relationships. This information had been stored in detailed files that went far beyond what was necessary for real estate transactions. Jennifer had also discovered evidence of David's equipment purchases, including invoices for surveillance cameras, network equipment, and data storage devices. The receipts showed that David had been building his surveillance operation over the past 2 years, with purchases totaling more than $50,000. The investment suggested that surveillance was a major component of his business model, not just a casual violation of client privacy. Most significantly, Jennifer had found evidence that David had been selling information about his clients to third parties. Email records showed communications with data brokers, marketing companies, and other businesses that purchased personal information about potential customers. David had been monetizing the surveillance of his clients, turning their private information into a profit center for his business. This discovery transformed my understanding of David's motivations from personal violation to commercial exploitation. He wasn't just invading his clients' privacy for voyeuristic purposes. He was systematically harvesting their personal information for financial gain. The scope of his criminal enterprise was much larger than I'd imagined, and it affected every client he'd represented. Jennifer agreed to copy all the relevant files and provide them to me as evidence of David's activities. She also committed to helping me contact other victims and build a coalition of people who'd been harmed by David's surveillance operation. Her cooperation would be crucial in ensuring that David faced consequences proportional to the scope of his criminal activities. As I prepared for the final phases of my plan, I felt confident that I'd gathered the intelligence and built the network necessary to expose David effectively. The evidence was compelling, the victims were numerous, and the allies were committed to helping me achieve justice. David Chen was about to discover that his surveillance operation had created the very network that would destroy him. The housewarming party was still 3 days away, but I was already confident that it would achieve its intended purpose. David would arrive expecting to celebrate my new home, but instead he would face a room full of people who knew exactly what he'd done. The revelation would be public, comprehensive, and devastating to his reputation and his business. I spent the rest of the day finalizing my preparations and coordinating with my allies. The intelligence gathering phase was complete, and I was ready to move into the next stage of my plan. David Chen had violated my privacy and exploited my trust, but he'd also underestimated my capacity for strategic response. The housewarming party would demonstrate that Emma Martinez was not someone to be victimized without consequences. The transformation from victim to strategic opponent felt complete and empowering. I'd gathered the intelligence, built the network, and prepared the evidence necessary to expose David's criminal enterprise. The next phase would test my ability to execute the plan effectively and ensure that David faced justice for his actions. The housewarming party was about to become the most important event of my life, though not for the reasons I'd originally planned. With my evidence compiled and allies in place, I began the systematic campaign to apply pressure on David Chen from multiple angles simultaneously. The housewarming party was now just 2 days away, and I needed to create enough chaos in David's professional life to ensure he would be completely off balance when the final confrontation occurred. My first move was to file formal complaints with the Colorado Real Estate Commission, the Better Business Bureau, and the local Chamber of Commerce. Each complaint was meticulously documented with photographs of the surveillance equipment, technical reports from Marcus Williams, and witness statements from Jennifer Kim and several of David's victims. The complaints didn't seek immediate action, but they created an official paper trail that would be crucial when the story became public. Jennifer had provided me with contact information for 12 additional clients who had worked with David over the past 18 months. I spent the morning calling each of them, using a carefully crafted script that presented me as someone researching customer satisfaction for a local business publication. The conversations were revealing and disturbing, painting a picture of systematic privacy violations that went far beyond what I had initially discovered. Maria Santos had purchased her home through David 7 months earlier and had experienced a series of unsettling incidents. Her home Wi-Fi network had been compromised repeatedly, her personal laptop had been accessed remotely, and she'd received targeted advertisements for products she'd only discussed in private conversations within her home. When she'd mentioned these concerns to David, he'd suggested she upgrade her security system and had recommended a technician who'd had unusual access to her network equipment. Robert and Linda Chen, ironically sharing David's last name despite being unrelated, had worked with him 9 months ago and had discovered unauthorized access to their joint bank account. The security breach had occurred just weeks after David had visited their home for a post-sale follow-up, during which he'd spent considerable time in their home office, where they kept financial documents. The bank's investigation had been inconclusive, but the timing was suspicious. Dr. Patricia Williams, a local physician who'd purchased her home through David, had experienced a particularly disturbing violation. Her medical files had been accessed illegally, and confidential patient information had been leaked to unknown parties. The breach had resulted in a malpractice lawsuit that had nearly destroyed her practice. She'd never connected the incident to David until my phone call, but the timing coincided with his installation of her home security system. Each conversation revealed new dimensions of David's criminal enterprise. He wasn't just conducting surveillance. He was systematically exploiting his access to clients' homes and personal information for financial gain. The scope of his activities included identity theft, financial fraud, professional sabotage, and potentially blackmail. The pattern was clear and devastating, affecting dozens of victims who had trusted him with their most important financial transaction. I documented every conversation and began building individual case files for each victim. The evidence was overwhelming and would be crucial in ensuring that David faced appropriate consequences for his actions. More importantly, these victims represented a growing coalition of people who had been harmed by David's activities and would be motivated to help expose him. Marcus Williams had been conducting surveillance on David's daily activities and had discovered several concerning patterns. David's schedule included regular visits to clients' homes long after transactions had closed, often when the homeowners were at work or traveling. He'd also been meeting with individuals who appeared to be involved in data trafficking and identity theft operations. The surveillance revealed that David's criminal activities extended far beyond real estate and into organized crime networks. The most disturbing discovery was that David had been using his real estate license to gain access to homes that weren't even his clients'. He'd been posing as a potential buyer or inspector to gain entry to properties where he could install surveillance equipment or gather personal information. This systematic approach to home invasion represented a new level of criminal sophistication that would be particularly damaging to his reputation and legal standing. Marcus had also discovered that David maintained a sophisticated data processing center in a rented warehouse outside of town. The facility contained servers, data storage equipment, and analysis tools that suggested he was processing personal information from hundreds of victims. The scale of the operation was staggering and indicated that David had been building this criminal enterprise for several years. Armed with this intelligence, I began the next phase of my campaign: strategic leaks to damage David's reputation within the real estate community. I contacted 3 influential real estate agents who competed with David for high-end clients and shared carefully selected information about his surveillance activities. The information was presented as confidential intelligence that might be relevant to their own client safety protocols. The response was immediate and intense. Within hours, rumors about David's activities were circulating throughout the real estate community. The rumors weren't specific enough to be actionable, but they created doubt about David's integrity and professionalism. Several potential clients canceled appointments with him, and at least 2 current transactions were put on hold while buyers reconsidered working with him. Jennifer reported that David had become increasingly paranoid and agitated as the rumors spread. He'd been making frantic phone calls to professional contacts, trying to determine the source of the information and control the damage to his reputation. His behavior was becoming erratic, and he'd been snapping at staff members and clients who questioned his methods or recommendations. The pressure was having the intended effect. David's carefully constructed professional facade was beginning to crack under the weight of scrutiny and suspicion. His ability to attract new clients was being undermined by questions about his integrity, and his existing business relationships were being strained by uncertainty about his practices. My next target was David's financial stability. Using information provided by Jennifer, I contacted the bank that held Chen Real Estate's business accounts and shared evidence of David's illegal activities. The bank's compliance department was required to investigate potential criminal activity involving their customers, and they immediately froze several accounts pending a full review of David's financial records. The financial pressure was immediate and severe. David's ability to conduct business was severely hampered by the account freeze, and he was forced to scramble to find alternative banking arrangements. The situation also triggered automatic notifications to several regulatory agencies, creating additional legal complications for David to navigate. I also contacted David's insurance company and provided them with evidence of his surveillance activities. Professional liability insurance policies typically excluded coverage for criminal acts, and David's illegal surveillance would likely void his protection against lawsuits from affected clients. The insurance company immediately initiated an investigation and sent notification that David's coverage was under review. The insurance investigation created another source of pressure for David. Without professional liability coverage, he couldn't legally practice real estate in Colorado, which meant his business would be forced to shut down until the matter was resolved. The investigation also triggered automatic notifications to the state licensing board, creating additional regulatory scrutiny. Jennifer reported that David was becoming increasingly desperate as the various pressures mounted. He'd been working late into the night trying to address the multiple crises affecting his business, and his stress was becoming apparent to clients and colleagues. Several staff members had expressed concern about his erratic behavior and his ability to manage the firm effectively. The timing was perfect for the next phase of my campaign. I contacted Detective Lisa Rodriguez and provided her with a comprehensive package of evidence documenting David's criminal activities. The package included photographs of surveillance equipment, technical reports from Marcus Williams, witness statements from multiple victims, and financial records showing David's equipment purchases and data sales. Lisa's response was immediate and professional. She confirmed that David's activities constituted multiple felonies under Colorado law, including burglary, stalking, identity theft, and fraud. The evidence was sufficient to support criminal charges, and she initiated a formal investigation that would involve multiple law enforcement agencies. The police investigation added another layer of pressure to David's deteriorating situation. Search warrants were issued for his home, office, and warehouse facility, and his activities were now under active surveillance by law enforcement. The investigation also triggered automatic notifications to professional licensing boards and regulatory agencies, creating additional legal complications. I also contacted the editor of the Riverside Heights Herald, the local newspaper that covered community news and business developments. I provided them with a carefully crafted press release announcing the discovery of an illegal surveillance operation targeting local homeowners. The press release was scheduled for publication the day after my housewarming party, ensuring maximum impact when the story became public. The media attention would be crucial in ensuring that David's activities received appropriate scrutiny and that other potential victims came forward. The story would also serve as a warning to other real estate professionals about the consequences of violating client trust and privacy. As the pressure mounted from multiple directions, David's behavior became increasingly erratic and desperate. Jennifer reported that he'd been making frantic phone calls to former clients, apparently trying to determine who might have discovered his surveillance activities. His paranoia was affecting his ability to work effectively, and several clients had expressed concerns about his professional competence. The systematic nature of the pressure campaign was having the intended effect. David was being forced to respond to crises on multiple fronts simultaneously, preventing him from developing an effective defense strategy. His reputation was being damaged, his finances were being disrupted, and his legal situation was deteriorating rapidly. I decided to escalate the pressure by contacting several of David's largest clients directly. Using information provided by Jennifer, I reached out to 3 major property developers who had used David's services for multiple transactions. I shared evidence of his surveillance activities and suggested they might want to review their own security protocols to ensure they hadn't been compromised. The developers' response was swift and decisive. All 3 companies immediately terminated their relationships with David and began internal investigations to determine if their own confidential information had been compromised. The loss of these major clients represented a significant financial blow to David's business and further damaged his reputation within the real estate community. Jennifer reported that David had become increasingly isolated as former colleagues and business partners distanced themselves from him. His professional network was collapsing as people sought to avoid association with his legal troubles. The social isolation was adding to his stress and making it even more difficult for him to manage the multiple crises affecting his business. The warehouse facility where David stored his surveillance data was raided by police as part of their investigation. The raid uncovered extensive evidence of his criminal activities, including servers containing personal information from hundreds of victims, financial records documenting his illegal profits, and equipment used to process stolen data. The evidence was overwhelming and would be crucial in securing criminal convictions. News of the police raid spread quickly through the real estate community, confirming the rumors that had been circulating about David's activities. The raid provided official validation of the concerns that had been raised about his business practices and effectively ended any remaining doubt about his criminal activities. I also contacted the State Attorney General's office and provided them with evidence of David's interstate data trafficking activities. The sale of personal information across state lines constituted federal crimes that would be prosecuted by federal authorities. The federal investigation would ensure that David faced appropriate consequences for the full scope of his criminal enterprise. The federal investigation added another layer of legal complexity to David's situation. Federal crimes typically carried more severe penalties than state charges, and federal prosecutors had greater resources to pursue complex cases involving organized crime networks. The investigation also triggered asset forfeiture proceedings that would prevent David from benefiting financially from his criminal activities. Marcus Williams reported that David had been meeting with criminal defense attorneys, apparently preparing for the legal challenges he was facing. The meeting suggested that David was finally beginning to understand the scope of his legal troubles and was preparing for a potentially lengthy court battle. The legal pressure was having a significant impact on David's ability to operate his business. Several pending real estate transactions were canceled, as clients lost confidence in his ability to provide professional services. His reputation was so damaged that he was effectively unable to attract new clients or maintain existing business relationships. I decided to apply additional pressure by contacting David's professional mentor, Robert Harrison, who had helped him establish his real estate career. Robert was a respected figure in the local real estate community and had served as a character reference for David in various professional contexts. I provided Robert with evidence of David's criminal activities and suggested he might want to reconsider his association with his former protégé. Robert's response was immediate and decisive. He publicly withdrew his support for David and issued a statement distancing himself from David's business practices. The statement was widely circulated within the real estate community and further damaged David's reputation among his professional peers. The professional isolation was becoming complete as David's network of supporters and advocates abandoned him. His ability to rebuild his reputation and restart his business was being systematically undermined by the loss of professional relationships and community support. Jennifer reported that David had been making increasingly desperate attempts to contact former clients and business partners, apparently trying to limit the damage to his reputation. His efforts were largely unsuccessful, as most people refused to associate with him given the criminal charges he was facing. The final element of my pressure campaign involved contacting the victims I'd identified and organizing them into a coordinated group that could support each other and pursue legal action against David. The victim support group would be crucial in ensuring that everyone who had been harmed by David's activities received appropriate compensation and that his criminal enterprise was fully exposed. The victim support group grew rapidly as more people came forward with stories of privacy violations and financial losses. The group provided a forum for sharing information, coordinating legal strategies, and supporting each other through the difficult process of seeking justice. The collective action was more powerful than individual efforts and ensured that David couldn't minimize or dismiss the harm he had caused. By the evening before my housewarming party, David's world was collapsing around him. His business was failing, his reputation was destroyed, his finances were frozen, and he was facing serious criminal charges. The systematic pressure campaign had achieved its intended effect of isolating him professionally and legally while building a strong foundation for seeking justice. The housewarming party was now positioned to serve as the final act in David's professional destruction. He would arrive expecting to maintain his facade of professionalism and customer service, but instead he would face a room full of people who knew exactly what he had done. The revelation would be public, comprehensive, and devastating to any remaining shred of his reputation. I felt confident that the pressure campaign had achieved its objectives. David was weakened, isolated, and unprepared for the confrontation that awaited him. The systematic approach had created multiple sources of pressure that prevented him from developing an effective defense strategy. His ability to control the narrative, or minimize the consequences of his actions, had been systematically undermined. The transformation from victim to strategic opponent was nearly complete. I had gathered the evidence, built the coalition, and applied the pressure necessary to ensure that David would face appropriate consequences for his criminal activities. The housewarming party would demonstrate that Emma Martinez was not someone to be victimized without facing serious repercussions. As I made final preparations for the party, I reflected on how much had changed since discovering the first surveillance camera. What had begun as a personal violation had evolved into a comprehensive campaign for justice that would protect other potential victims and ensure that David's criminal enterprise was permanently dismantled. The party was scheduled to begin at 7 o'clock, and David had confirmed his attendance earlier in the week. He had no idea what awaited him, but he was about to discover that his surveillance operation had created the very network that would destroy him. The housewarming party would be memorable for everyone involved, though not for the reasons David expected. The morning of the housewarming party arrived with perfect weather and a sense of anticipation that felt electric. I had spent the week transforming my home into what would appear to be a celebration but was actually a carefully orchestrated confrontation. Every detail had been planned with precision, from the guest list to the timing of revelations, and I felt a calm confidence that came from knowing I held all the advantages. David called at 9 in the morning, his voice strained and tired. The pressure campaign had clearly taken its toll, and he sounded like a man desperately trying to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his grasp. He asked if he could arrive early to help with party preparations, claiming he wanted to ensure everything was perfect for my special day. I agreed, knowing that his early arrival would give me the opportunity to gauge his mental state and adjust my strategy accordingly. Jennifer had spent the night at my house, ostensibly to help with party preparations, but actually to provide moral support and witness protection for what was about to unfold. She was nervous but determined, having seen evidence of David's criminal activities that had shaken her faith in everything she thought she knew about her business partner. Her presence would be crucial in validating the accusations I was about to make and providing professional credibility to the confrontation. Marcus Williams had positioned himself across the street in an unmarked van, equipped with surveillance equipment that would document everything that happened during the party. His role was to gather evidence of David's reactions and statements that could be used in legal proceedings. The irony of surveilling the surveiller wasn't lost on any of us, and Marcus had expressed particular satisfaction in turning David's own tactics against him. Lisa Rodriguez was attending the party in her capacity as my neighbor, but she was also there as a police detective who could take official action if David's behavior became threatening or if he attempted to flee when confronted with the evidence. Her presence provided an added layer of security and legal authority that would be crucial if the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation. The victim support group I had organized was also represented at the party. Sarah Mitchell, Amanda Foster, and Dr. Patricia Williams had all agreed to attend and share their experiences with David's surveillance activities. Their presence would demonstrate that David's crimes weren't isolated incidents, but part of a systematic pattern of abuse that had affected multiple victims across an extended period. I had also invited several prominent members of the Riverside Heights business community, including the president of the Chamber of Commerce, the editor of the local newspaper, and 2 city council members. Their presence would ensure that David's exposure was witnessed by people who could take official action and that the story would receive appropriate public attention. The guest list was completed by my coworkers, neighbors, and friends, who had been expecting a traditional housewarming celebration. Their presence would provide normal social context for the event, while also serving as additional witnesses to David's behavior and the revelations about his criminal activities. David arrived at 5:30, 90 minutes before the party was scheduled to begin. He appeared haggard and stressed, with dark circles under his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands that suggested he was operating under significant strain. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, and his characteristic confidence seemed forced and artificial. He brought an expensive bottle of wine and an elaborate flower arrangement, gifts that seemed calculated to reinforce his image as a thoughtful and generous professional. His demeanor was overly cheerful, as if he was trying to project normalcy while dealing with the multiple crises affecting his business and personal life. Jennifer greeted David with professional courtesy, but I could see the tension in her posture and the way she avoided making direct eye contact with him. David seemed to sense that something was wrong, asking several times if everything was all right and if there were any problems with the party preparations. Jennifer deflected his questions skillfully, maintaining the pretense that everything was normal, while clearly struggling with the knowledge of what was about to unfold. I engaged David in casual conversation about the party preparations, watching his reactions carefully for signs of suspicion or awareness of the trap that was closing around him. He seemed genuinely unaware of the evidence I had gathered against him, though his paranoia was evident in the way he constantly scanned the room and asked detailed questions about the guest list and party schedule. When David asked about the home security system and whether I was satisfied with its performance, I felt a surge of anger at his audacity. He was literally standing in the room where he had secretly recorded me for months, asking about my security concerns as if he had been protecting rather than violating me. The psychological manipulation was so brazen that it took considerable self-control to maintain my composure. As guests began arriving at 7 o'clock, David slipped seamlessly into his professional persona, greeting people warmly and presenting himself as the helpful realtor who had made my home purchase possible. He worked the room expertly, engaging in conversations about the local real estate market and sharing stories about his successful transactions. His performance was convincing enough that guests who didn't know the truth would have seen him as a charming and successful professional. The early part of the party proceeded normally, with guests touring the house, enjoying appetizers and drinks, and engaging in typical social conversations. David positioned himself strategically near the entrance, introducing himself to guests and reinforcing his role in helping me find the perfect home. His behavior was calculated to establish his credibility and likability before any negative information could be shared. I watched David's interactions carefully, noting how he gathered information about guest backgrounds, professions, and personal circumstances. Even in a social setting, he was conducting reconnaissance, collecting details that could potentially be useful for future exploitation. His behavior patterns were so ingrained that he couldn't help but engage in information gathering even when his professional future was hanging in the balance. At 8 o'clock, I called for everyone's attention and began what appeared to be a traditional toast, thanking people for attending my housewarming party. The guests gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, expecting conventional remarks about my new home and appreciation for their friendship and support. David positioned himself prominently in the group, clearly expecting to be acknowledged for his role in helping me purchase the house. I began by expressing genuine gratitude for everyone's presence and support during my transition to Riverside Heights. I talked about the challenges of moving to a new city, the excitement of buying my first home, and the importance of building community connections. The opening remarks were warm and conventional, designed to put everyone at ease and establish a positive atmosphere before the dramatic shift in tone. Then I shifted to discussing the home buying process and the importance of trust in real estate transactions. I talked about how buying a home represents one of the most significant investments most people make, and how that investment requires complete faith in the professionals who guide the process. David nodded approvingly, clearly expecting to be praised for his professionalism and expertise. Instead, I paused dramatically and said that I had discovered something about my home purchase that I needed to share with everyone present. The room fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. David's expression shifted from confident anticipation to confused concern as he began to realize that the evening might not unfold as he had expected. I walked to the bookshelf where I had discovered the first surveillance camera and retrieved a small box that had been hidden there. I opened the box to reveal the 3 cameras that David had installed in my home, placing them carefully on the coffee table where everyone could see them clearly. The reaction was immediate and intense, with guests expressing shock and confusion about what they were seeing. I explained that these were professional surveillance cameras that I had discovered hidden throughout my home, recording my private activities for months without my knowledge or consent. I held up the camera with the Chen real estate sticker, explaining that this equipment belonged to my realtor and had been installed without my permission during the home buying process. David's reaction was swift and desperate. He immediately began denying any knowledge of the cameras, claiming they must have been planted by someone else who was trying to frame him. His denials were frantic and unconvincing, and several guests began backing away from him as the implications of the discovery became clear. I calmly explained that I had extensive evidence documenting David's surveillance seamlessly into his professional persona, greeting people warmly and presenting himself as the helpful realtor who had made my home purchase possible. He worked the room expertly, engaging in conversations about the local real estate market and sharing stories about his successful transactions. His performance was convincing enough that guests who didn't know the truth would have seen him as a charming and successful professional. The early part of the party proceeded normally, with guests touring the house, enjoying appetizers and drinks, and engaging in typical social conversations. David positioned himself strategically near the entrance, introducing himself to guests and reinforcing his role in helping me find the perfect home. His behavior was calculated to establish his credibility and likability before any negative information could be shared. I watched David's interactions carefully, noting how he gathered information about guests' backgrounds, professions, and personal circumstances. Even in a social setting, he was conducting reconnaissance, collecting details that could potentially be useful for future exploitation. His behavior patterns were so ingrained that he couldn't help but engage in information gathering, even when his professional future was hanging in the balance. At 8 o'clock, I called for everyone's attention and began what appeared to be a traditional toast, thanking people for attending my housewarming party. The guests gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, expecting conventional remarks about my new home and appreciation for their friendship and support. David positioned himself prominently in the group, clearly expecting to be acknowledged for his role in helping me purchase the house. I began by expressing genuine gratitude for everyone's presence and support during my transition to Riverside Heights. I talked about the challenges of moving to a new city, the excitement of buying my first home, and the importance of building community connections. The opening remarks were warm and conventional, designed to put everyone at ease and establish a positive atmosphere before the dramatic shift in tone. Then I shifted to discussing the home buying process and the importance of trust in real estate transactions. I talked about how buying a home represents one of the most significant investments most people make, and how that investment requires complete faith in the professionals who guide the process. David nodded approvingly, clearly expecting to be praised for his professionalism and expertise. Instead, I paused dramatically and said that I had discovered something about my home purchase that I needed to share with everyone present. The room fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. David's expression shifted from confident anticipation to confused concern as he began to realize that the evening might not unfold as he had expected. I walked to the bookshelf where I had discovered the first surveillance camera and retrieved a small box that had been hidden there. I opened the box to reveal the 3 cameras that David had installed in my home, placing them carefully on the coffee table where everyone could see them clearly. The reaction was immediate and intense, with guests expressing shock and confusion about what they were seeing. I explained that these were professional surveillance cameras that I had discovered hidden throughout my home, recording my private activities for months without my knowledge or consent. I held up the camera with the Chen real estate sticker, explaining that this equipment belonged to my realtor and had been installed without my permission during the home buying process. David's reaction was swift and desperate. He immediately began denying any knowledge of the cameras, claiming they must have been planted by someone else who was trying to frame him. His denials were frantic and unconvincing, and several guests began backing away from him as the implications of the discovery became clear. I calmly explained that I had extensive evidence documenting David's surveillance reports on his data processing operation and documentation of his meetings with criminal associates. The evidence was overwhelming and comprehensive. The revelation that David had been under surveillance himself was particularly satisfying. Marcus explained that David's activities had been monitored, recorded, and documented using the same techniques that David had used against his victims. The poetic justice of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present, and David's realization that he had been outmaneuvered was evident in his expression. David made one final desperate attempt to control the situation by claiming that he was the victim of an elaborate frame-up orchestrated by disgruntled former clients. He suggested that I had fabricated the evidence against him and had conspired with others to destroy his reputation and business. His claims were so outrageous that they actually strengthened the case against him by demonstrating his detachment from reality. The confrontation reached its climax when I presented David with a comprehensive dossier documenting his criminal activities. The dossier included photographs of surveillance equipment, technical reports on his data processing operation, financial records showing his illegal profits, and victim statements from dozens of people who had been harmed by his activities. The evidence was so extensive and well documented that it left no room for denial or deflection. David's response was complete psychological collapse. He began crying and admitted that he had been conducting surveillance on his clients, though he claimed it was for their own protection. He explained that he had been trying to keep them safe from burglars and other threats, a justification that was so transparently false that it actually made his situation worse. The admission of guilt was recorded by multiple witnesses and would be crucial evidence in any criminal proceedings. David's attempt to justify his actions as protective rather than exploitative was particularly damaging because it demonstrated his continued detachment from the reality of his crimes. Jennifer announced that she was immediately terminating her business relationship with David and would be cooperating fully with law enforcement in their investigation. She explained that she had been unaware of David's criminal activities and was horrified to learn about the scope of his surveillance operation. Her public disavowal of David eliminated any remaining professional support he might have had. The party guests began leaving rapidly, clearly uncomfortable with the dramatic confrontation they had witnessed. Several people expressed support for me and disgust at David's behavior, while others simply wanted to distance themselves from the situation. The social consequences of David's exposure were immediate and severe. David made one final desperate plea for understanding, claiming that he had made mistakes but didn't deserve to have his life destroyed. He asked for forgiveness and promised to make amends for his actions. His plea was met with silence and obvious skepticism from everyone present. Lisa Rodriguez informed David that he needed to come to the police station for questioning about the criminal investigation. David initially resisted, claiming he needed to contact his attorney, but Lisa explained that he could call his lawyer from the station. The legal consequences of his actions were beginning to manifest in real time. As David was escorted from my home, he turned back to look at me with an expression of hatred and defeated rage. He clearly understood that his professional career was over, his reputation was destroyed, and his legal future was uncertain. The confrontation had achieved its intended purpose of holding him accountable for his actions and ensuring that he could never harm another client. The party concluded with the remaining guests expressing support for my courage in exposing David's criminal activities. Several people mentioned that they had suspected something was wrong with David's behavior, but hadn't known how to address their concerns. The confrontation had validated their instincts and provided a public forum for holding him accountable. Jennifer stayed behind to help clean up and to discuss the future of Chen Real Estate. She explained that she would be taking over the firm and would be implementing new policies to prevent similar violations from occurring. Her commitment to ethical business practices would help rebuild trust in the organization and protect future clients. Marcus Williams provided me with copies of all the evidence he had gathered, explaining that it would be crucial for any civil lawsuits I might choose to pursue against David. He also offered to continue monitoring David's activities to ensure that he didn't attempt to resume his criminal behavior or retaliate against his victims. As the evening concluded, I felt a sense of satisfaction and closure that came from knowing that David would face appropriate consequences for his actions. The confrontation had been public, comprehensive, and devastating to his reputation and career. More importantly, it had sent a clear message that privacy violations would not be tolerated and that victims would fight back against those who exploited their trust. The housewarming party had achieved its intended purpose of exposing David's criminal activities and holding him accountable for his actions. The transformation from celebration to confrontation had been dramatic and effective, ensuring that David's crimes would be widely known and that he would face both legal and social consequences for his behavior. The evening represented a complete reversal of power dynamics, with David going from confident professional to exposed criminal in the span of a few hours. The systematic nature of the confrontation had prevented him from developing an effective defense and had ensured that the truth about his activities would be widely known and officially documented. The weeks following the housewarming party brought a cascade of consequences that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. David Chen's world didn't just collapse. It disintegrated so completely that it became a cautionary tale throughout the Colorado real estate community. The ripple effects of his exposure spread far beyond Riverside Heights, affecting professional standards, legal precedents, and the way real estate transactions would be conducted for years to come. The first major development came just 3 days after the party, when the Riverside Heights Herald published a comprehensive exposé about David's surveillance operation. The article, written by investigative journalist Rebecca Stone, detailed not only the scope of David's criminal activities, but also the systematic way in which I had uncovered and exposed them. The story included interviews with multiple victims, technical analysis of the surveillance equipment, and official statements from law enforcement agencies investigating the case. The newspaper article sparked immediate outrage throughout the community. Local television stations picked up the story, and within a week, it had been covered by regional news networks and eventually by national media outlets. The story resonated because it touched on fundamental concerns about privacy, trust, and the vulnerability of homeowners to exploitation by the professionals they relied upon. The media attention brought forward dozens of additional victims who had experienced similar violations at the hands of David and other real estate professionals. The Colorado Attorney General's office established a special task force to investigate privacy violations in real estate transactions, and several other states began reviewing their own regulatory frameworks to prevent similar abuses. David's criminal case moved through the legal system with remarkable speed, partly because of the overwhelming evidence against him, and partly because of the public attention the case had received. The district attorney's office filed 43 separate felony charges against David, including burglary, stalking, identity theft, fraud, and violation of privacy laws. The federal investigation added additional charges related to interstate commerce and organized crime. The legal proceedings revealed the true extent of David's criminal enterprise. Prosecutors demonstrated that he had been conducting surveillance on more than 200 clients over a 3-year period, generating illegal profits in excess of $400,000. The systematic nature of his operation and the premeditated way in which he had violated his clients' trust made his case particularly heinous in the eyes of the court. David's attempts to negotiate a plea agreement were unsuccessful because prosecutors were unwilling to accept anything less than a sentence that would reflect the severity of his crimes and serve as a deterrent to others who might consider similar activities. His defense attorneys argued that he was suffering from mental health issues that had impaired his judgment, but the systematic and profitable nature of his operation undermined any claims of diminished capacity. The trial began 6 months after the housewarming party and lasted for 3 weeks. I testified for 2 full days, describing the discovery of the surveillance equipment, the investigation I had conducted, and the impact of David's violations on my sense of security and privacy. My testimony was particularly powerful because I was able to demonstrate not only the personal harm I had suffered, but also the strategic way in which I had fought back against David's exploitation. Jennifer Kim's testimony was equally compelling. She described how David had manipulated her trust and exploited her professional reputation to facilitate his criminal activities. Her decision to cooperate with law enforcement and her commitment to reforming Chen real estate demonstrated that not all real estate professionals were willing to tolerate unethical behavior within their industry. The victim impact statements were perhaps the most powerful element of the trial. More than 30 people testified about how David's surveillance had affected their lives, their relationships, and their sense of security in their own homes. Dr. Patricia Williams described how the theft of her medical records had nearly destroyed her practice and had caused lasting damage to her professional reputation. Sarah Mitchell talked about the psychological trauma of knowing that her most intimate moments had been recorded and potentially shared with unknown parties. The technical evidence presented by Marcus Williams and other investigators demonstrated the sophisticated nature of David's operation. The surveillance equipment he had used was professional grade, the data processing systems were complex and expensive, and the methods he had employed to avoid detection showed considerable planning and expertise. The evidence made it clear that David's crimes were not impulsive acts, but rather the result of careful planning and systematic execution. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. The speed of their decision reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence against David and the clarity of his criminal intent. The conviction sent a clear message that privacy violations would be treated seriously by the legal system and that real estate professionals who abused their clients' trust would face severe consequences. David's sentencing hearing took place 2 months after his conviction. Judge Margaret Thompson sentenced him to 12 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The sentence included restitution payments to all identified victims and forfeiture of all assets that had been acquired through his criminal activities. The judge specifically noted that David's betrayal of professional trust and his systematic exploitation of vulnerable clients warranted the maximum sentence allowed under state law. The federal charges resulted in an additional 8-year sentence that would run concurrently with the state sentence. The federal judge emphasized that David's interstate data trafficking activities represented a serious threat to commerce and privacy rights that required significant punishment. The combined sentences ensured that David would spend more than a decade in prison and would be subject to supervision for years after his release. The Colorado Real Estate Commission permanently revoked David's license and imposed a $50,000 fine that would be used to fund additional consumer protection initiatives. The Commission also implemented new regulations requiring real estate professionals to undergo annual ethics training and to submit to periodic inspections of their business practices. The reforms were designed to prevent future violations and to restore public confidence in the real estate industry. Jennifer Kim successfully rebuilt Chen Real Estate under new management and with a completely reformed approach to client service. She implemented strict privacy protocols, regular security audits, and comprehensive background checks for all employees. The firm became a model for ethical real estate practices and was frequently cited by industry organizations as an example of how businesses could recover from criminal scandals through transparency and reform. The victim support group that had formed during the investigation evolved into a permanent organization dedicated to helping people who had been harmed by privacy violations. The group provided counseling services, legal assistance, and advocacy for stronger privacy protection laws. The organization became a powerful voice for consumer rights and was instrumental in securing passage of new legislation strengthening privacy protections in real estate transactions. My civil lawsuit against David resulted in a judgment of $250,000 in damages, including compensation for the violation of my privacy, the costs of the investigation, and punitive damages designed to deter similar behavior. The judgment was secured by David's assets, including his home, his business interests, and his investment accounts. The financial consequences of his actions were severe and long-lasting. The lawsuit also established important legal precedents regarding privacy rights in real estate transactions. The court ruled that real estate professionals have a heightened duty to protect their clients' privacy, and that violations of that duty could result in significant financial liability. The decision was cited in similar cases throughout the country and helped establish stronger legal protections for consumers. The impact of the case extended far beyond individual consequences for David. The National Association of Realtors implemented new ethical guidelines, specifically addressing privacy and surveillance issues. Real estate schools began including privacy protection in their curriculum, and professional organizations started offering specialized training on ethical business practices. The case became a catalyst for industry-wide reform that strengthened consumer protections and professional standards. The media attention surrounding the case also raised public awareness about privacy risks in real estate transactions. Consumer advocacy groups used the story to educate homeowners about their rights and the warning signs of potential exploitation. The case became a powerful example of how individual action could create systemic change and protect other potential victims. My professional life was transformed by the experience in ways I hadn't anticipated. The strategic thinking and investigative skills I had developed during my campaign against David proved valuable in my graphic design work. I began specializing in projects that required complex problem-solving and systematic analysis, and my reputation for thoroughness and attention to detail helped me attract high-profile clients. The case also opened unexpected opportunities for advocacy and public speaking. I was invited to speak at conferences about consumer protection, privacy rights, and the importance of fighting back against exploitation. These speaking engagements allowed me to share my story and help other people understand how to protect themselves from similar violations. The relationship with Jake deepened significantly during the months following the trial. His exploitation. The educational impact of the case extended to law schools and criminal justice programs throughout the country. The case became a standard example in courses on consumer protection, privacy law, and white-collar crime. Students studying these fields learned about the importance of thorough investigation, strategic planning, and victim advocacy in pursuing justice for complex crimes. The technological aspects of the case also influenced the development of new detection and prevention tools. Security companies began offering services specifically designed to identify unauthorized surveillance equipment, and privacy protection organizations developed new guidelines for detecting and preventing surveillance violations. The case demonstrated the importance of technical expertise in investigating modern crimes and protecting consumer rights. My personal transformation through the experience was profound and lasting. The discovery of David's surveillance had initially made me feel vulnerable and violated, but the successful campaign to expose his activities had demonstrated my own strength and capability. I had learned that I could successfully fight back against exploitation, and that strategic thinking and careful planning could overcome even sophisticated criminal enterprises. The experience also taught me the importance of building alliances and seeking support from others who shared my commitment to justice. The network of victims, professionals, and advocates who had supported my case became a lasting source of strength and inspiration. The relationships formed during the investigation and trial continued to provide mutual support and collaboration in addressing other consumer protection issues. The case established my reputation as someone who would not tolerate exploitation and who had the skills and determination to fight back effectively. This reputation proved valuable in all aspects of my life, from professional relationships to personal interactions. People understood that I was someone who could be trusted to stand up for what was right and to take action when necessary to protect myself and others. The legal precedents established by the case continued to influence consumer protection law for years after David's conviction. Courts throughout the country cited the case in similar privacy violation cases, and the standards established by the prosecution became models for other legal proceedings. The case demonstrated that privacy violations could be successfully prosecuted, and that victims could obtain meaningful compensation for the harm they had suffered. The regulatory reforms implemented as a result of the case strengthened consumer protections throughout the real estate industry. The new requirements for ethics training, background checks, and business practice audits made it more difficult for unethical professionals to exploit their clients. The reforms also created new mechanisms for reporting and investigating suspected violations, making it easier for victims to seek help and for authorities to identify and address problems. The community impact of the case extended far beyond the immediate victims and participants. The case became a symbol of how individual courage and strategic action could create positive change and protect others from exploitation. Community organizations used the story to educate residents about their rights and the importance of reporting suspicious activities. The case demonstrated that ordinary people could successfully fight back against sophisticated criminal enterprises and could create lasting change through their actions. As I reflected on the entire experience, from the initial discovery of the surveillance equipment to the final resolution of all legal proceedings, I was struck by how much had changed in my life and in the lives of others affected by David's crimes. What had begun as a personal violation had evolved into a comprehensive campaign for justice that had protected countless other potential victims and had created lasting reforms in the real estate industry. The transformation from victim to victor had been complete and permanent. I had not only successfully defended my own privacy and security, but had also created a model for others who might face similar violations. The case demonstrated that with careful planning, strategic thinking, and determination, individuals could successfully fight back against exploitation and could create positive change that extended far beyond their own circumstances. The legacy of the case continued to influence consumer protection efforts and privacy rights advocacy for years after David's conviction. The story became a powerful example of how individual action could create systemic change and could protect others from exploitation. The case demonstrated that justice was possible even in complex cases involving sophisticated criminal enterprises, and that victims could successfully fight back against those who violated their trust. The house on Maple Street remained a symbol of empowerment and justice, a place where I had successfully defended my privacy and had held those who violated it accountable for their actions. The home represented not just a personal victory but also a broader triumph of justice over exploitation and of individual courage over systematic abuse. The case would be remembered as a landmark example of how one person's refusal to accept victimization could create lasting change and protect others from similar harm. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Victim to victor had been complete and permanent. I had not only successfully defended my own privacy and security, but had also created a model for others who might face similar violations. The case demonstrated that with careful planning, strategic thinking, and determination, individuals could successfully fight back against exploitation and could create positive change that extended far beyond their own circumstances. The legacy of the case continued to influence consumer protection efforts and privacy rights advocacy for years after David's conviction. The story became a powerful example of how individual action could create systemic change and could protect others from exploitation. The case demonstrated that justice was possible even in complex cases involving sophisticated criminal enterprises, and that victims could successfully fight back against those who violated their trust. The house on Maple Street remained a symbol of empowerment and justice, a place where I had successfully defended my privacy and had held those who violated it accountable for their actions. The home represented not just a personal victory but also a broader triumph of justice over exploitation and of individual courage over systematic abuse. The case would be remembered as a landmark example of how one person's refusal to accept victimization could create lasting change and protect others from similar harm. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.